Hello and welcome to 3 Minute Gaming. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you if this game's worth your time and bandwidth.
Today's game is Crow Country. PS1 pre-rendered backdrops, isometric perspective, and polygonal horror fuse in this retro-style horror indie game. Is it worth booking your ticket to Crow Country? Let's find out. Crow Country is an isometric survival horror game with a lot of throwbacks in its ideas, but spicing things up with a modern twist. You play as Mara, purple-haired teenager trying to find Edward Crow for an undisclosed reason. He's housed up in Crow Country, his abandoned theme park with 3 themed areas and plenty of Resident Evil style key and door puzzles keeping you from certain zones. The story is surprisingly engaging. As the mystery of Crow Country grows, the more you explore, and there's a large number of NPCs wandering the premises with their own side stories to keep track of. Gameplay is survival horror distilled down to its basics. You start with a simple handgun and limited ammo and a park full of various spooky monsters, and you'll have to mostly avoid them to find items and solve puzzles to continue. Most puzzles involve inputting numbers in a keypad relative to a hint found nearby, though it does mix this up a few times with keys, keyboards, and even a small maze. It also makes you write stuff down, which, as you know, I just love that. You have an isometric perspective that you can spin but can't pan up and down, and the game often hides enemies or traps in blind spots to catch you off guard. Speaking of those enemies, you have simple controls to aim, reload, and shoot, though I did find the camera made fighting a bit frustrating. There's supplies to be found all over, from boxes that have a chance for random items, vending machines to kick, and glass bottles with loot. Like classic survival horror, there is some emphasis on route planning, as you'll be unlocking shortcuts through staff areas as you progress, and since there's no checkpoints, you'll need to plan routes that circle past save rooms every so often. The game does have 2 difficulties, basically one with enemies and one without, though regardless which one you pick, the game is pretty short and pretty easy. And mechanically, that's Crow Country, a throwback survival horror simplified, and with a lot of the rougher edges sanded down, but with a great PS1 look and plenty of puzzles to solve. So what did I like about Crow Country? Well, I just loved this game's aesthetic. I imagine if you aren't ancient like me and weren't around during the PS1 days, it won't do as much for you, but I've been dying for people to make modern takes on pre-rendered backdrops, and Crow Country absolutely nails it down to the smallest details. It's incredibly nostalgic. On that same note, the atmosphere is very strong here, something you can't really evoke with modern graphics. The restrictive third-person camera allows for some great natural scares, and the fog and grainy aesthetic only amp up the creep factor. And lastly, I don't say this for very many games, but I found the sound design to be really excellent here, tying into that atmosphere but having great echoing footsteps, creepy guttural monster noises, and stirring ambiance. When it comes to the bad, enemies respawning periodically kind of killed what the point of the early RE games were about, which was clearing out certain routes using your limited resources. I never felt like if I cleared a zone, it would stay cleared, making enemies more an annoying handicap than a fun gameplay puzzle. On that note, dying can actually be pretty brutal, especially since you die in only a few hits and there's no checkpoints. I lost over an hour on my first pass because I missed a save point and died to a random trap. It was very frustrating. And don't even get me started on the traps. In what world do chandeliers respawn? Not to mention scenarios where traps would block the only pathway through somewhere, meaning you're basically gonna take a hit. It just feels kind of unfair. As you know, I rate games here on a 3-point scale. Must play, maybe consider, and don't bother. And while Crow Country definitely has a few rough edges, honestly, they mostly just add to the game's charm. It's a gorgeous game with throwback aesthetics and atmosphere, but modern sensibilities around its puzzles, combat, and horror elements, paired with a subtle sense of humor and an engaging exploration loop. I was enthralled from start to finish, and once I beat it, I jumped back into S-rank it. If you enjoyed old school horror games back on the PS1, you probably have lower back problems now, and you deserve a break playing Crow Country. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you play Crow Country, are you going to check it out? Do you like survival horror games? Are you old enough to even remember the PS1? Please let me know in the comments, but regardless, go out there and give Crow Country a look.